The loss of a loved one, or of a relationship, even our own inner peace, requires some soothing advice. How to cope, next on Living Smart. Hello, I'm Patricia Gras. Welcome to Living Smart, a new series about getting the most out of life. On our show today, we'll learn how to deal with all types of losses. Whether we lose a loved one, a relationship, or our own inner peace, loss is a part of life. Today, Senior Pastor Dr. Jim Moore with St. Luke's United Methodist Church will share what he's learned about coping with grief. Have pen and paper ready. We'll give you a list of resources at the end of the program. All of us will suffer a loss in our life. And with that loss, feelings of hurt, confusion, and despair. Dr. James Moore is a reverend at St. Luke's United Methodist Church.
Over my time in the ministry, I've had a number of occasions where I've had to go tell that kind of bad news to a family. But only one other time did I have to tell parents that your child has died.
Dr. Moore has written 33 books on faith, spirituality, and grief, something he knows all too well. He lost both his parents in separate car accidents.
When Grief Breaks Your Heart is the name of the grief book. And I wrote it, interestingly, the first chapter I wrote a couple of days after my mother's funeral. And normally when I write and rewrite and write and rewrite. And that particular day, I just sat down, of all things, at the kitchen table at home. Then I just started writing, and it just went right through. We had such a response to that, from people wanting copies of it, that it said to me there's a need here, that people are really need help when it comes to grief.
So it was both the hardest and the easiest book for him to write.
When you're working with people who are in grief, they're saying, please help us, or please help me. When someone you love dies, your soul is screaming, somebody help me. Cynthia, did you hear from Dr. Craddock yet?
Cynthia Sarver has assisted Dr. Moore for more than 15 years. She has seen thousands flock to him seeking advice for their problems. And when she faced a possible loss, he was there for her too.
I had a situation where my little dog had an illness which was very, very troublesome to me, and I didn't know what was going to have to happen. And I was in Dr. Moore's office when the veterinarian called me back to give me the bad news, and they did all these things and determined that he had lymphoma sarcoma. And of course the tears came, and I was just tremendously upset because I am a widow, and he's been with me for like 12 years, and so he's just my best friend. And Dr. Moore helped me by helping me work through it. He'll ask me what I think. He listens.
Dr. Moore's most popular book is titled, Yes, Lord, I Have Sinned, but I Have Several Excellent Excuses. He loves making people laugh and think when he preaches.
The best of all the preachers are those who live their creeds.
And he calls his most precious work the ministry of encouragement.
And what I mean by that is being able to put the heart back into people and say there's hope. If I can put the heart back into people when they trudge into my office with slumped shoulders, and then all of a sudden I can see them sitting a little taller and thinking, you know, maybe I can get through this. And that's a great moment for me to be able to encourage people.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be with you.
I want to ask you about the little dog.
Oh, the little dog is doing fine.
I'm so glad to hear that.
He's still receiving treatments, but he's doing well. And I just asked Cynthia about him this morning. She said he's doing great.
Good deal. You found out about your dad's death in a very, very strange way. Tell me about that.
I did. My dad became very ill on a Sunday afternoon, and he was one of those men that didn't complain. but he was so ill, and the ambulance, we called for an ambulance, and it had ran out of gas or had a flat tire or something, and they called and said, we can't come. And so some neighbors across the street drove my mom and dad to the hospital. On the way there, a car went through a stop sign and hit their car broadside. Everybody in the accident was hurt terribly, terribly, in horrible, horrible ways. We went to the hospital and walked the floor, and then finally they sent us home and said, you know, you can come back in the morning. And later, after the children, my brother was 14, I was 12, my little sister was 6. After we had gone to sleep, the phone call came that my dad had died, and all the relatives who'd gathered in said, well, let's let the children sleep. But they didn't count on what happened. I got up early the next morning, went out and got the paper and opened up the Memphis Commercial Appeal, and the lead story was a picture of this smashed up car, which was our car, and the caption read, Wendell Moore dies in car wreck. And that was how I found out. I read it in the newspaper before anybody could get to me to tell me.
What was your first reaction? I mean, how old were you? 12 years old?
I was 12 years old. My first reaction was just shock and, disbelief. And then interestingly, Patty, I learned that later what this was all about, but I had a guilt feeling. And I remembered that a few months before at a family picnic, my brother and I were showing off how hard we could throw a baseball. And I was trying to outdo my brother, who was 2 years older. And I threw the ball, and it was wild, and it hit my dad in the hand and broke his thumb. This had no relationship to the accident. He was in the back seat of the car. His thumb was well, but as a little 12-year-old boy, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm a terrible son. I broke my dad's thumb. And did I say, I'm sorry enough?
Right.
But that's a typical. I know now that's a typical part of the grief process. You go through some of that. And I was able to work through it, and now I can tell people about that and help them work through that sort of thing.
Didn't you go talk to a pastor to help you with this?
I still can't believe I did this. I was just 12, but I called the church and made an appointment with my pastor. He was a wonderful older gentleman. And when I told him that ever since Dad's death that I'd been worried about this, and I couldn't get it out of my mind, and I just couldn't remember whether I had said I'm sorry enough. And he did a great thing. He came over and sat down, and he pulled up a chair, an empty chair, and he said, Jim, I want you to imagine in your mind that your dad could come back to life for 5 minutes, and he's sitting in this chair. And if he knew what you were worried about, what would he tell you? I said he would tell me to quit worrying about that. And he said, well, I'm going to be your dad's voice. Now, young man, you quit worrying about that. You understand? And I walked out of that office feeling absolved. I felt like I had been forgiven, and I was able to put that. And I will always be indebted to that wonderful pastor for the way he
helped you.
That.
You mentioned the first step of grief. First step, shock.
Shock, numbness, yeah.
Tell me about the 7 steps of grief and why that helps you cope with the process.
Okay, different people write these different ways. My list is this: first is shock, numbness. That's where it's almost as if God anesthetizes us to get us through those first hard moments. We walk around sort of like robots, zombies. We just do what we have to do, but we're just sort of numb.
Yeah.
And then secondly is expressed emotions, where you cry, which is fine. That's a gift from God. It's okay to cry. And you talk it out, and that's very, very helpful to be able to talk out what you're feeling. And then thirdly, after the shock, numbness, and the expressed emotions, there's what I call existential loneliness. Now, existential is a great big old word that means extremely personal loneliness, that nobody's feeling it like you are. It's unique to you.
You feel alone, yeah.
Right. But the good news is, and this is as close as I'll get to preaching here, you're not alone. God is with you, and God will get you through this. Your friends are with you. They will get you through this. Your loved ones are with you, and they will get you through this. So you just keep going one day at a time, one thing at a time, one step at a time, and you'll come out of it with in my opinion, God's help. The fourth step is resentment or anger. Life knocks us down. We lie there for a while and sort of feel sorry for ourselves. And then there comes a point where we stiffen the backbone and come back at life. And characteristically, many people over-stiffen, and they come back a little bit harder than is normally characteristic of them. And they just resent that this has happened. And they may get angry with why didn't the doctor come more often? Why didn't the nurse come when I called? Why didn't the church come? You know, whatever.
All the whys. Yeah.
All the whys. And you begin to say, well, dadgummit, you know, or worse than that.
Yeah, right.
And then after you get through that, you go to the next stage, which is guilt. Now, we live in a world, Patty, that tells us today, which I think erroneously tells us this, that when something is wrong, the first thing you got to do is find somebody to blame it on. So when something happens bad, we begin to look out there to find somebody to blame this on. And after a while, it's not fulfilling, and you don't feel any better. And so then what we do is we turn inward, and we go, oh, you know, why didn't I call more often?
Right.
Why didn't I say I love you more often? Why wasn't
the regrets?
I'm visiting with a man last night who has been with his dad who was dying, and he had to leave for just a short period of time, and his dad died during that period of time, and he's feeling horrible. And I'm trying to help him to realize it's okay. You know, you didn't have to be there every single second. That it's okay, but that's it's a natural thing. Just like when I read in the paper about my dad, one of the first thoughts I had was I broke his thumb with a baseball.
Right. That's the first.
But what I say to people is that's one of the stages of grief. Remember this conversation. You and I talked about that. And when you feel resentful or if you feel guilty, you remember, well, you know, we talked about that, and that's just, I'm not going crazy. It's just part of what you go through.
It's part of the process.
But you keep going, and you finally come to the last stage, which is the return to reality. Now, we're never the same. I have a dear friend who lost her son, a wonderful young man. She'll never be the same. She'll never get over that. But she will get to the point where she can go on with life. And she can get up in the morning not totally consumed with this problem, where you can move on with your life. And what I say to people is, when they've lost a loved one, you know, the choices are, I lost my mother and my dad in car wrecks. My choices are, I can sit at my desk every day and feel sorry for myself, or I can live my life as a tribute to them. And I can say, what was it that was special about my dad? He was a kind man. Everybody at his funeral, everybody who came by said, your daddy was kind to me. And I made up my mind that the best tribute I could pay my dad was to try to be a kind person. Now, I don't always succeed at that, but I try really hard to be a kind person as a tribute to my dad, but also as a tribute to my Lord, who was a kind person and who lived, Christ did, in the spirit of love and kindness and compassion. Right. And so I try to do that.
Let me ask you this. One other type of loss that we have to deal with is the loss of a relationship. Yeah. Sometimes that's even more painful than the loss of a loved one. Why is that, and how do we cope with that?
Okay. When my mother died, she died in a car wreck, and she didn't choose to do that. She didn't choose to end that relationship. And as horrible as that was, what would have been even more painful would have been if she had said to me, I don't want to be your mother anymore. Get out of my life. Because whether it's real or imagined, when you feel that you've been rejected, that somebody doesn't want to be around you or with you, that's painful. Now, when somebody dies, if they have an illness or if they have an accident, they didn't choose to get out of your life. When somebody comes and says, I don't want to be around you anymore, then you have the pain of the loss, but you also have the feeling that you've been rejected. And then sometimes accompanied with that is a feeling that I failed. Right. What did I do wrong? I had the strangest situation one time where a woman, every time she became pregnant, her husband would just go nuts. He would just go off and find him another woman. He couldn't stand. Most men think their wives are beautiful and radiant when they're pregnant, but this man was the other way around. And twice he did this. He would go across the street, move in with another woman, and she would come to me and say, what did I do wrong? I said, you didn't do anything wrong. You're living with the fallout of his problem. And some people, but see, she immediately thought, I did something wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. She was giving birth to a baby, which is a part of the miracle of life.
Right,
It's
right.
beautiful. It's not ugly. But immediately when her husband would do these crazy things, she would turn in on herself and think, well, I did something wrong, or he wouldn't have done it. And I told her, if you took Demi Moore and a whole bunch of other gorgeous, beautiful, terrific, wonderful women and rolled them all together, he's still going to do the same thing.
Right,
'Cause
right.
it's his problem.
It's his problem.
Yeah.
So you have advised also not to take it personal, but that is so difficult
It's
because
very,
you're in
very
love with
difficult.
someone, they reject you.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you do
and,
that?
And sometimes I will say to people, I'm going to say something to you that you're going to you think sounds crazy, but I think it's profound, and that is, don't take this personally. Now, what I mean by that is that sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, we have to live with the fallout of another person's problem. And so you don't have to blame it on yourself. You have to deal with the situation, but still feel good about who you are and try to redeem the situation the best you can. Sometimes that redemption can come with that other person, and sometimes it can't. Sometimes a situation becomes so destructive that it's more redemptive for people to not be together than to live in that horrible situation that's bringing the worst out in everybody. Now, I've never recommended to anybody that they get a divorce. I've had some situations where I thought the world would be better off if she lived in Boston and he lived in Albuquerque. I mean, because they just got
Just
where
doesn't
they're
work.
missing
Right.
so badly that the situation becomes destructive and sometimes even dangerous.
Right.
So sometimes you just have to figure out, is this a relationship that's so destructive that it can't be redeemed? Your choice is, there are two kinds of relationships. Constructive relationship, where the two people involved bring the best out in each other.
Right.
The destructive relationship is where the two people involved bring out the worst in each other. If you have a destructive relationship, you've got three choices. First of all, convert it to a constructive relationship if you can. If you can't do that, then you cope with it. Some people do that. Well, it's not the best, but I'm going to stay, like that. But the problem with that is that life is supposed to be celebrated. We don't just cope through life. We want to celebrate life and enjoy life. And then, sadly, there are some times when the relationship has to be dissolved because it just can't be redemptively worked out. But that's when I say to people, don't take this person. Don't blame yourself if you're living with the fallout of somebody else's problem.
You advise people all the time about relationships, how to make a marriage work. How do you do that? I mean, that's one of the things that you need to do to avoid a broken heart.
Yeah. Well, I will say to people, I met with a couple yesterday afternoon, and I went over with them the 4 C's of a great marriage. Communication is number 1, and communication in a marriage should be happening on 4 levels: physical, social, intellectual, and spiritual. Physical communication is a communication of touching. Social is the friendship, just enjoying each other. Intellectual is sharing your values and your philosophy of life, and spiritual is sharing God and your faith. The second C is courtship. And one of the great problems that people have, we hear about the 7-year itch. What happens is they fall in love, they romance one another, they court one another, and then they run into the responsibilities of life. And the greatest enemy of romance is responsibility. We got to get these kids up, we got to get them going, we got to get them to school, we got to get them to football, we got to get a cheerleader, we got to get homework, we got to get them in bed because we got to get up and do this again tomorrow. And so if you don't make time for the courtship, it gets left out.
Right.
And couples lose the very thing, the courtship, that brought them together in the first place. So it's incredibly important to continue to romance and court one another. The third C of a good marriage is commitment, that you go in with both feet, you go in committed to the relationship, committed to the marriage, committed to each other. And you don't say, well, let's try it and see if it works, because that's doomed from the start, because every relationship will have stress. And if you're doing the let's try it deal, as soon as stress comes, you think, well, knew it wasn't going to work, and you bail. If you're committed, you don't do that. You say, uh-oh, a little stress here. Let's learn from this. Let's grow on this. Let's help each other through this. Let's love each other through this. And then the final C, and of course I'm a minister, so obviously I would say this would be church. That I think if a couple, a family can share their faith experience. It's really a wonderful thing for them. But it's so important. You know, in real estate, they say it's location, location, location. In marriage, it's love, 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 and communication, communication, communication.
Right.
You have to tell the other person what you're wanting, feeling, thinking, needing, and expecting, and there's nothing wrong with that. And people, you know, want to know what you're wanting, feeling, thinking, needing, and expecting. But we don't think we have permission a lot of times to do that. We think that if that other person loves me, then she should know. You know, but she's not going to know if I don't tell her, and especially he's not going to know if you don't tell him.
You know, you just mentioned something that happens to couples today, which is driving the children to school, soccer games, you know, football games, skating. It's a hectic life,
Right.
And we have lost somewhat our sense of inner peace.
Right.
How can we get some of that back?
Yeah, I think that you know, everybody's autobiography is also their theology. I mean, who you are, what you believe, what your values are, it means so much in creating who you are. So I'm a Christian, I'm a minister, but even if I weren't a minister, I would still be a devoted Christian because I have found the great secret to life there. And I have found a great sense of peace in being able to try to live my life as a witness to my faith, not in the way that I'm carrying a big sign, but so that I live in a way that's respectful of other people, that's thoughtful of other people, that's kind and compassionate toward other people, and to live my faith in that way. And when I do that, and as mentioned earlier in this program, I love to encourage people. And it literally means, in French, to put the heart in. And some of my most rewarding moments is when somebody comes to me and they're just so down in the dumps, and then I'm able to encourage them and put the heart back into them, and they walk out standing taller and feeling like, you know, I can get through this and I can go on with my life. So that's what gives me a sense of peace, is to feel like my life has meaning, and that it is that I'm related well to other people and to my faith and to my God, and that I am able to do something that's worthwhile, that makes life better and helps improve the quality of life for people.
Is that how you know you're living smart?
Well, I hope so. You know, as I mentioned before, I'm a Christian, so I always look back, and Jesus becomes the measuring stick for me. And to sum up what he said, the great commandment, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So if you have this vertical relationship of love and a healthy relationship with God, and if you have the horizontal healthy relationship of love toward other people, there's a great sense of peace that comes from that, and you feel like I'm getting it right.
If you're not a Christian, or you belong to another religion or no religion at all, is there a right or wrong way to pray?
Yeah, I think prayer is friendship with God. And so a lot of times people think they have to use sacred sounding language. But I say to them, whatever you're feeling, God is your best friend. Just pull up a chair, an empty chair, and just talk to that chair as if God were sitting there, like you would if you're talking to your best friend. And if you're upset, say that. If you're feeling good, say that. If you're grateful, say that. The Psalms are wonderful examples of this. The psalmist will fuss at God, will complain to God, but will also praise God and thank God. And almost always the Psalms start with praise to God or thanksgiving to God, and then he sort of bears his soul, and then it's a sandwich treatment. You thank God, you bare your soul, and then you thank God again. And that's sort of the way the psalmist does that. And I think that's the way you pray, as if you're talking to your best friend. And God can handle it. You know, a lot of times we think, well, oh, God will be upset if I say I'm unhappy. No, he won't. He will understand that because he's your best friend.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore, for joining us.
Thank you for letting me be with you.
Thank you. And for more information on Dr. Moore, you can call St. Luke's United Methodist Church, 713-622-5710, or check their website, stlukes-hou.org. If you're grieving, a helpful support group can be found at griefnet.org. Another support group if you're grieving the death of a child is Compassionate Friends. Their number is 1-877-969-0010 or check their website, compassionatefriends.org. Please remember to visit houstonpbs.org/livingsmart for a complete resource list, and feel free to share your own experience on how you may have coped with losses in your life. We'll post some of your tips on our website. You can call us with your comments at 713-743-8513 or email us with your comments at livingsmart@houstonpbs.org. I'm Patricia Gras. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you watch our next episode with Cindy Graves Wigglesworth on finding spiritual meaning in your work. Have a great week, and remember to live smart. Thank you.